Why did America forget the whiskey it loved most? The dusty green bottle in my hand right now is that very drink. For over a century, every bar in America poured it. Then it vanished so completely that people forgot its name. That drink is rye whiskey. The story begins on America's East Coast in the 17th century. Dutch and German immigrants planted rye in that rough soil. In the cold East, where corn and barley struggled, rye held on stubbornly. The spirit made from that rye was rye whiskey. The first spirit Americans ever distilled was not corn, but rye. A newly independent America began turning away from British rum and gin. Rye whiskey stepped into that empty space. From the early 1800s to the 1920s, it was the most beloved spirit in the country. The old-fashioned, the Manhattan, the whiskey sour were all built on rye at first. For over a century, the American glass was filled with the taste of rye. Rye whiskey grew along two branches depending on the region. Pennsylvania's Monongahela rye used only rye and malted barley for a bold, chewy character. Maryland rye blended in corn for a softer, sweeter pour. The same grain became a different spirit on different ground. These two branches were the pride of American rye. By the early 1900s, Pennsylvania rye was shipped well beyond America to the rest of the world. It earned such a name for quality that it traveled as far as Australia. In Queensland, it was even said to be used as a remedy for rattlesnake bites. A single glass could be medicine and a point of pride all at once. America's #1 spirit died in just 13 years. When Prohibition began in 1920, making and selling liquor became illegal overnight. Locks went onto the doors of rye distilleries. The most beloved drink in the country came to a complete stop in the legal world. When Prohibition ended in 1933, people assumed they could simply reopen the doors. But 13 years was far too long. The owners who ran rye distilleries and the craftsmen who made the spirit had mostly passed away. What disappeared was not the whiskey, but the people who knew how to make it. The knowledge passed from mouth to mouth, and every one of those mouths had closed. The distilleries that did reopen faced another wall. Post-war America subsidized corn, and bourbon made from corn kept getting cheaper. Cheap and easy-to-produce bourbon quickly took over the market. Kentucky's cornfields refilled the American glass. Rye whiskey surrendered its place to bourbon. For decades after that, rye whiskey stayed in the shadows. Even into the early 2000s, the makers of rye could be counted on one hand. Only a few bottles sat lonely in the corner of a shelf. America's most beloved drink had become an almost forgotten name. Then, in the 2000s, some people called rye back. They were the bartenders making cocktails. To properly revive the classic pre-Prohibition cocktails, they needed the original taste rye. In 2006, Sazerac and Templeton brought rye back, and in 2008, a rye specialist distillery called Whistle Pig was born. The forgotten spirit returned riding inside a cocktail glass. Once the fire caught, hands reaching for rye multiplied fast. Production that was 88,000 cases in 2009 passed 1.4 million cases by 2020. That is roughly a 15-fold jump in just over a decade. A spirit that had nearly stopped began boiling up steeply again. This whiskey is made from a grain that went extinct. For rye to fully return, not just the spirit, but the grain itself had to come back. Rosen rye, once considered the finest in America's Northeast, had nearly vanished. But its seeds still survived in a single drawer of the United States Seed Bank. People took those seeds back to the fields, and the forgotten grain woke up again. The grain was not the only thing recovered. At one distillery, 95 forgotten old barrels were discovered in the corner of a warehouse. That whiskey was reborn as a rare rye, more than 20 years old. There were even people who pulled extinct rye from a sunken shipwreck underwater. The revival of rye whiskey was the work of recovering lost time, one piece at a time. Every rye whiskey bottle is green, and almost no one knows why. Walk down the rye aisle of a liquor store, and green labels stand in a row as if by agreement. There is actually no rule and no tradition that says rye must be green. In the 1970s and 80s, Jim Beam and Wild Turkey used green on their rye labels, and it simply stuck. A single color that was never a rule became an agreement across the whole industry. The drink America loved and then forgot has come back to us a century later. Cocktails, seed banks, and human hands stitched back the gap that Prohibition tore open. If you raise a glass of rye today, a lost and returned century sits inside it. Walkie will empty that glass slowly today.